Thank you, everybody, for joining this week's Cyber Speaker Series sponsored by PNC. I got the PNC Protect and Connect shirt. Drew is our host. Drew, take the floor.
Awesome, guys. Thank you for coming. This week we got Chloe. She is the VP of Strategy at Point3 Security, has hosted numerous different keynotes across the board, all about kind of perception of hackers and kind of the threats they might actually propose, and kind of just that perceived threat, that kind of issues around them. So Chloe, welcome. And I will go ahead and let you take the floor, and you should be able to present at your leisure.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe and sane during this time. And I'm excited to do this talk with you. It's very dear to my heart. So let's just dive into it. If you have any questions at all, let me know at the end, so that I can make sure that I may just answer it in the middle of my talk. So you have to be patient, but take down notes if you have any questions. So let me just pull up PowerPoint 1 second. All right, can everyone see my screen? Yes, excellent. So today we're going to talk about hacker rights. And in this talk itself, we're going to talk about what is the difference between a hacker and an attacker as well, because it's something that you should probably know. But first, I just want to say that this talk is completely dedicated to all those hackers who've been scared to disclose a vulnerability, to all the hackers who have been prosecuted for trying to do something good or actually just doing their job, and to all the people who are on the fight to bring rights for hackers. So let's keep going here. So once again, my name is Chloe Messdaghi. I'm the VP of Strategy over at Point3 Security, but my usual job outside of that is many different things like you see in this list. I am basically an advocate for information security, and I'm also an activist, meaning I take action, not just speak about it. I'm also the co-founder of Hacking is Not a Crime, which I'll talk about a little bit later at the end of this talk, because you'll understand why. I'm also president and co-founder of WOSAC, which basically we have chapters all over the world for women and non-binary to network with one and each other. And also I'm the founder of We Are Hackers, formerly known as Women Hackers. And what we are is a virtual community, which basically has hackers of all levels that are marginalized genders. So anyone who is not a cis male is welcome. It's really cool because we do free workshops and everything. So if you want to join, feel free. It's 100% free. I'm also a podcast for ITSP magazine, The Uncommon Journey, with Phil Wiley and Alyssa Miller. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also a hacker book club organizer. We meet every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and we read a new book every month. But the books are written about the hacker community, and the author does attend our sessions. Also, those that are mentioned in the book do attend our sessions as well. So it's a really good opportunity for the hacker community to read a book together about the hacker community and have the author be part of it. Then it's my URL. If there's anything you want to know about me, it is on there most likely. That is my Twitter and Instagram handle. Feel free to follow. Also, my DMs are always open. So in case you want to reach out afterwards, you have the ability to do so. So let's get into the real important thing about this entire conversation, the current landscape. Now, I want to just quickly go over 2 things with you. So the first things first is there is a huge difference between a hacker and an attacker. Now, the thing to note about that is that they use the exact same skills set, but for different purposes. The skill sets are very different in a sense that they use the same everything, but the intent is different. So one causes abuse, the other one is to protect. So hackers are there to protect and serve. Attackers are there to use it for their own benefit. That's either to collect information, data, also to get money out of you. Now, the thing you need to know about them is that also hackers go by the term security researcher. They usually use that term so to avoid the public being scared of them. And we'll dive a little bit further into why we need to acknowledge that there are these 2 parties. But the current landscape is a little bit scary, so we're going to touch on this together. So first, you probably remember the Equifax breach, but did you know that about 6 months before the breach happened, a hacker contacted them about the vulnerability that they found? And in return, Equifax didn't do anything about it. And so when the vulnerability was basically discovered by an attacker and used it for their own gain, it was too late. And 147 million at least of their customers were impacted by this breach, with their personal information then being leaked all over the internet. So this is something to keep in mind, once again, is that you'll have hackers report a vulnerability, but sometimes it's not taken into consideration. It's either ignored or it's misinterpreted, and then they're served with a lawsuit. And we're going to get into that a little bit deeper, but I want to keep setting up this scene for you to understand how it is right now. The other one is Capital One. If you may not know about this, was that basically the breach took place across March and April of 2019, and Capital One was not aware of it. But a hacker did report to them that they came across basically a GitHub page that was public that shared all this private data that looked like it was Capital One private data of their customers. Once again, it was something that was reported by a hacker to let a company know. But the thing is that we need to take into consideration what happened if no one reported the vulnerability. And the unfortunate part is that 60% of researchers don't report vulnerabilities because of the fear of being prosecuted, because we have these really out-of-date laws, which we'll go into later. But the thing you need to know is that not just 60% are afraid of basically being prosecuted here, but also HackerOne, they had a 2018 report that showcased that 1 out of 4 of hackers will not report a vulnerability because of that reason, but also because when you do report it, usually you have to go through certain channels, so social media. So you might DM someone on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook to let them know about a vulnerability, because they don't have a vulnerability disclosure policy set. And because they don't have vulnerability disclosure policy set, this leaves it into a really scary situation to report a vulnerability. And so what happens usually is that 1 out of 4 hackers that do come across a vulnerability and the organization doesn't have vulnerability disclosure policies, it ends up, when they do contact them, it's either ignored or misinterpreted. And this can come with serving a lawsuit when you're just trying to help out a company. So why are hackers scared? I mean, besides the whole thing, if I report a vulnerability, I'm afraid that I'm going to get prosecuted. The other thing is that when companies don't have vulnerability disclosure policies set, it's scary of figuring out what is in scope, what's not in scope, and then who to contact. Sometimes when trying to find the person to contact, it could take days, weeks, months. And at that point, you never know if an attacker comes across the vulnerability and use it for their own gain. So it's all about the hackers trying to reach out to these companies about the vulnerability so they fix it in time before an attacker takes advantage of it and use it for their own gain. But the thing is that even when they're trying to do the right thing, they're still constantly having legal threats. And this is one of the cases for DJI. So if you see here, this is Kevin. And Kevin came across DJI's private bug bounty program. Now, the thing to know about private bug bounty program, what I mean is it was a company run. So it wasn't on HackerOne, it wasn't on BugCrowd, it was within their own house. Now, the thing you need to know about is when you are starting your own bug bounty program, you need to have management, like an actual person who would be in charge of making sure that everything is being patched, making sure to have constant contact with the hacker that reported the vulnerability to let them know if it's been patched, but someone to organize and manage the entire program. The unfortunate bit is that sometimes companies, they're like, let's do this program, but in reality, it's not well run, it's not fully researched. And this is what happened with Kevin's case. So when Kevin came across like what was pretty much in scope of their bug bounty program, which included basically security issues in firmware, application servers, including source code leak, security workaround, and privacy issues, Kevin wanted to reconfirm what was publicly already stated on their site for their bug bounty program to make sure, once again, it has something in writing that yes, that is the confirmed scope. So he emailed them and it took him 2 weeks to respond. That's letting you know as a red flag, they don't have good management yet for this program. Because it was already on their website. All they had to do is like, yes, as stated on our website, those are all within scope, but they did not. It took them 2 weeks. And when they did said, yes, it is in scope indeed. So then Kevin did participate in their bug bounty program and submitted a vulnerability. They offered him $30,000 for his findings. But when it came to receiving that funds, he looked over the contract and the contract offered no protection of himself. So he walked away from the $30,000. Now at this time, DJI internally was freaking out, thinking that he might become a PR nightmare or a liability to DJI. So what they did was threaten him with a lawsuit. He received this letter saying that he went out of scope and under CFA, the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, that he violated it, and thus they have every right to sue him. At this time, because he stayed within scope, participating in their bug bounty program, he then decided, well, you want to play that way? Fine. So he decided to put a blog post together, which also had internal conversations and also communications that he had with DJI. At that time, they did grant them bad publicity, and they did decide to no longer keep going further with the lawsuit. But that's the thing you have to take into consideration is that think about Kevin's situation there was that he was just trying to do something good. He is like, I want to participate in your bug bounty program. I care about your customers, and that's why I want to participate in it. He finds a vulnerability and gets $30,000 for it, but decides it's not worth it if it puts my life on the line for being prosecuted later on. So when he rejected it, they're like, we're going to come after you and we're going to sue you because we see you as a PR nightmare, even though he was within scope. And the thing is that even when you are hired to do a job, you're also putting yourself at a risk here. Because, for example, with coal fire, if you don't know, is that September of last year, the Iowa State basically asked coal fire to conduct penetration tests to see if a staff can gain access to sensitive data or equipment. So 2 coal fire employees were found at the door of the Dallas courthouse open. And so they basically decided to push it in and to see if the door closed would lock. And it did, but they proceeded to try to open the door to see if the alarm would go off. The alarm did go off. So following the protocol, they waited outside for the police to show up. They had their paperwork that they were hired by Iowa State. And initially they were told they were good to go, but a local sheriff arrived up on the spot and then basically sent them to jail for for 1 night. Even though they were hired to do this type of work and it was a legal job, they had to deal with the situation because that is the way that it's set up right now, is that even if you are employed to do this work, even if you're trying to protect companies as a good citizen in good faith, you still have to be concerned about a lawsuit or being prosecuted. But community consensus all agreed that we need vulnerability disclosure policies. We need the hacker community to participate because the thing is with diverse eyes on what you have a better ability to know what is at stake and what vulnerabilities need to be patched, because security teams are not always going to catch the vulnerabilities. So having outside eyes is always a bonus for you. But the whole thing is if you don't have a vulnerability disclosure policy, people don't know what's in scope, what's out of scope, but also who to contact if they find that vulnerability. And they want to know if they're going to be taken seriously when they report it and not to be having to deal with being prosecuted because of it. And I know this is a very scary subject, especially for the hacker community. So here are some puppies to lift your spirit. And yes, there is a cat if you can find it. I know I try to do it like a Where's Waldo thing, but it's pretty obvious that it's right there in the corner. But yeah, so take a deep breath, enjoy it, because we're about to go in it even deeper. All right. So why is it like this right now? So why is the world kind of have this idea of hackers, and why are companies still prosecuting them when they're trying to do something good? Well, the honest truth about it is that we're having a situation when it comes to imagery and language. With images, for example, if I were to search hacker as ethical hacker and criminal hacker, what I see is a lot of exactly the same thing. If you see in this photo, they look exactly the same. There's no difference. And that is how the public sees us. Whenever they do a Google search, they're getting this idea of what a hacker looks like. And it's not just that, it's also the imagery, because the imagery also is showing like you have this situation where these images are basically these hooded figures, but the language itself is using the term hacker when they should be using attacker. And the reality is that reporters don't know the difference. And maybe you didn't know there was a difference, but there is very much of a difference of the two parties. But the unfortunate bit is that no one knows about this two difference. But the thing you need to know is that the images and the language does impact us, because there's this thing called socially constructed beliefs. And if you don't know what socially constructed beliefs are, they're basically beliefs that you have formed and created by the things that you have learned in your lifetime. So say, for example, you turn on the TV, and on the TV, you see images of a hooded figure as the hacker. Or when you read a book, that when the term hackers used, it's a criminal. And also, I mean, the reality of it is that many people around the world have never met a hacker. So they're basing all their beliefs of what a hacker is and what it looks like based on what they're seeing in the media. And if you don't know the difference of what is media exactly, media is usually social media, press, and marketing. And because of them, we have this weird sense of what is a hacker. But the thing is that you need to know about socially constructed beliefs is that in turn, it does something to human behavior. And I want to talk about that with you. So human behavior, we got to talk about fear. Because at the root of all of this is that there is a fear of hackers, because it has been associated with criminals. So first things first is, if you do not know what the amygdala is, we're going to talk about that first. So the amygdala is kind of like your survival mechanism. It's basically your fight versus flight. You may have heard this before, but the thing you may not know is that it also sorts people of who's like you, who's not like you. So if you yourself are not a criminal, when you hear hacker and you meet a hacker, you might automatically put them into a category of not like you. So then it becomes a stranger danger, because the things that we don't know is a stranger danger. And so the amygdala is completely subconscious and taking the memories and beliefs that you have through what you see in the media and from conversations that you've had to realize what is something you need to be scared of or not. And I'll put it into an example. Pretend that basically that when you were young, you would turn on the TV, and on the TV, the people that the news would always claim were criminals were people with pink hair, let's just say. Now, the people with pink hair is not only just that, but you also see it in books, you see it in cartoons. You also maybe hear it indirectly from adults as a child. So when you're an adult at this point and you are walking down the street and suddenly there's someone with pink hair behind you, you go into a full-on reaction. Now, sometimes when you see someone with pink hair, what you may do is clutch your purse a little bit closer, your bag or whatnot. You might cross the street, or you might go into a store, because once again, it's a stranger danger, because you have been taught directly and indirectly that people with pink hair are criminals or dangerous individuals. And so thus, anytime you see someone with pink hair, you go into a panic. So now let's break it down even further. Now, what's happening is that when the person with pink hair is behind you, your amygdala is set off. Your amygdala is saying, warning, warning, stranger danger behind you. Or it could be warning, warning, pink hair person behind you. So your amygdala then sends a subconscious message to the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is right there. So your prefrontal cortex acts kind of like the CEO of your brain. It basically uses logic and reason to question the threat that the amygdala is sending to your direction. But also in this time, you might be thinking of how to escape. So such as what I mentioned, you might clutch your bag, you might cross the street or go into a local store, because these are the actions that you would take if you saw it as a perceived threat. Now, the thing you need to know is that this is the only time that you can consciously be aware if you're doing something wrong or something good. Now, it should be stated at this moment that socially constructed beliefs can totally be wrong. They can be completely false. And that's a really huge problem, because you have to think about this. The only reason that you're afraid of the person with pink hair is because you see it on TV and everything. But the only difference between that person and you is that they have pink hair. Now, at this moment, say you came across a YouTube video. And on this YouTube video, it was someone with pink hair talking about how hard it is to be them, because people see them as a threat, because it's what they see when they turn on the TV. It's what they see when they read articles or books. It's always talking bad about someone with pink hair. So you're always constantly afraid of this person with pink hair, and the pink hair person is overwhelmed and feels hopeless sometimes because they just wish people could see them for who they really are, not as a criminal, but as who they are, just like you and I. And so you see that video on YouTube and it makes you think. You might actually think of, I wonder if I've done those things. Because even in the video with the person with the pink hair, they said that how hard it is when they see someone, clutch their bag a little bit tighter across the street or to go in a store. It hurts them because they're just trying to have a normal life instead of being seen as something so devious. So that video really touches you and it makes you think, I wonder what I'm doing if I have done that before. And at that moment, you question. So let's go back to the scene. So the scene was with someone with pink hair is behind you and you're walking down the street and your amygdala sends a warning, person with pink hair. The warning goes to the prefrontal cortex of your brain, and your prefrontal cortex then breaks down the actions that you can take. First action is clutch the bag. Second action is cross the street. Third action is to go in the store. But at that moment, you remember that YouTube video of that person with pink hair talking about how hard it is to be them because everyone sees them as a threat. And at that moment, you realize, I'm doing exactly what that person was sharing in that video. This person is just with pink hair. They're not a threat. And I don't want to make that decision. So you have 4 decisions now, 4 actions that you can take. The first 3 are about taking an action and perceiving the person as a threat. But the last one is calm down, don't do anything. It's just a person with pink hair. So for the first time ever, you send a message back to your amygdala to simmer down. In other words, I'm going to trust that this person is just a person and not a criminal. And at that moment, that is how you make your decisions. So that's what you need to know, is that there are these things called socially constructed beliefs. They're not always true, but they really do impact others. So it's important for you to also be aware of what you're doing that is making things good or bad, because we all are doing that. It's human behavior to sort people who are like me, who are not like me. And the best way how you can do and face that is to be okay with being wrong, being okay to know that you're not always going to be the good person. And it's okay to make mistakes. But the thing is that if you keep repeating after you've acknowledged you've made a mistake, you're doing something wrong. So it's important that you need to question your biases. Your socially constructed beliefs can hurt another person. But the only way you're going to get there is you have to be okay with being comfortable with the uncomfortableness of you. So be okay with being wrong. But the one thing is that when we get outside our comfort bubble, that's when you really get to learn more about the world that we live in and the people that live in it too. So if you're wondering, when it comes to socially constructed beliefs, I wanted you to understand that we have to be very, very careful of the way that we think about each other. We have to always question our biases because it can hurt another person. And we also see this when it comes to the hacker community. Whenever I say like I work with hackers or I'm a hacker, the first thing that happens is they take a step back, their mouth drops, they try to get out of the room as fast as possible or leave the conversation because they are afraid. that I'm somehow a criminal. And that's the thing, is that we're not ever going to be able to challenge every single person's beliefs, but there are definitely people out there that are okay with being challenged, because those are the people that we want to reach, are the people that are going to try their best to have empathy in their life. Because right now, the way that it's set up, because they don't know our personal stories, it's causing these things to happen. Where 94% of the Forbes Global 2000 list still doesn't have vulnerability disclosure policies. That 60% of hackers do not report vulnerabilities because they're afraid of being prosecuted. That laws prevent good hacking the same way that it prevents bad hacking, such as the Computer Fraud Abuse Act and the DMCA. But it's also the reason why people are still prosecuting hackers, because they don't know there's a difference. If they knew that there was a difference, if they knew our personal stories, they would just realize that we're just like them. The only thing that's different is that we do something different. But the thing is that until we fix this problem, we're going to also still have an increase of bad actors, because there are some bad actors out there that kind of wear the gray hat, that are like, I want to do something good, but the thing is I'm going to be prosecuted regardless. So I guess, I'm going to try my best, but at the same time, what's the difference here? And that's the thing. We want to open the door for those that feel guilty, because there's a sense when people have guilt, those are people you can work with. Those are people that are going to be a little bit more responsible of changing their ways. So we've talked about socially constructed beliefs. We've talked about why it is how it is in a sense of the landscape when it comes to how hackers are feeling, how they're being perceived, and how that's not helping them. Now we need to dive into the legal stuff. Now, if you may know about the Computer Fraud Abuse Act itself, the CFAA was written in 1984. And the reason for that was because Ronald Reagan, he watched a movie called War Games, and he freaked out about the hacker community. So he himself decided, we got to do something about these hackers. And so that is how the Computer Fraud Abuse Act happened. Remember those socially constructed beliefs? Yeah, even movies can also influence people's decisions and to cause actions for them to take. Not necessarily right actions. That's the thing you need to remember. But basically anti-hacking laws such as the CFAA, what it does is that if a hacker goes out of scope or exploits without permission, this could be used to prosecute them. Now, anti-circumvention laws, these are copyright laws usually, such as the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA. It basically is the right to repair, seeing reverse engineering as a breach to companies, because it's their property and they didn't design it that way. But if you're doing that, they don't like that. And this was actually kind of created for pirating that was happening. There's also acceptable use policy out there, which is basically if you've ever tried to read your terms and conditions for an iPhone, I don't recommend it, but they probably own your life at this point. Just thought I should let you know. They may even own your firstborn child at this point as well. But the thing is that the acceptable use policy, it's basically the terms and conditions of things. And the thing is that the terms and conditions could be written for attorneys, for other attorneys to understand it, not for everyday people to understand it. And the problem with that is that when you have vulnerability disclosure policies that basically are around that terms and conditions, the problem is that those are usually not written for, say, an English learner to understand. And this could cause some major miscommunication issues, but also really bad issues later down the road. So it's important to understand is that everything that's written legally is usually written for lawyers to understand, not for the average person to understand, or even an English learner to understand. And this is the situation we're in. Now, the other thing you need to know is that there was no representation ever at the table of the hacker community when these laws were being implemented, which is a problem because that is an ongoing problem all over the world is when legislation is created and not all parties that could be impacted by it are represented before it's signed into anything. And that's a huge problem. And that's the reason why the Computer Fraud Abuse Act is hurting so many people that are just trying to be everyday heroes behind the scenes. So I want takeaway on that is that laws prevent good hacking in the same way they prevent attackers, and we really need good hacking, you guys. But I want to go further in the CFAA because it's really important that you understand it, because it's a CFAA that really holds back our community, but also causes a lot of problems for our community. So Computer Fraud Abuse Act, once again, it was made in 1994. Thing you need to know, it's so out of date, but it basically offers prosecutor discretion to threaten huge potential fines and jail sentences for relatively undisturbing violations of computer policy. Now, usually when people are being prosecuted for other things, it might not be as long and tedious as the CFAA does. So this is why you need to understand it. It's not just a fear of just being prosecuted. Being prosecuted under the CFAA is extremely terrible because, as you're going to find out in a bit, is that first, the CFAA as written punishes exceeding authorized access to a protected computer, which is definitely a phrase vague enough to inspire some really broad interpretations. Another flaw in the CFAA is the redundant provisions that enable a person to be punished multiple times for the same exact crime. So these charges can be stacked on top of one another, resulting in a threat of a higher cumulative fine and jail time for the exact same violation, which we saw in the Aaron Schwartz case, which will be coming up next. But also this allows prosecutors to bully defendants into accepting a deal in order to avoid facing a multitude of charges from a single solitary act. It also plays a significant role in sentencing. The ambiguity of the provision meant to toughen sentencing for repeat offenders of the CFAA may in fact make it possible for defendants to be sentenced based on what should be prior convictions, but were nothing more than multiple convictions for the same crime. Now, the most important thing to note is that the CFAA does give companies the right to sue. And the other thing is that at this time, I want to let you know, you don't have to worry too much about federal trying to go after you, but you have to be worried about companies. Companies and states and local counties can use this against you. But once again, you don't have to worry too much on federal. The DOJ has been doing whatever they can to prevent these situations happening federally. So just note about that. It's just more about local and companies that are using this for their own power. Aaron Schwartz case is one of those things that I use always as an example of why the CFA is so bad. The thing you need to know is that if you do not know who Schwartz is, you will now know about him. But basically in 2001, Corin Ortez, the attorney's office for the US, charged him for basically hacking into an MIT computer network to download millions of scholarly articles from JSTOR. It was supposed to be an act of civil disobedience because it was a protest to restrict the access of taxpayer research. But the thing to note about it is that the U.S. attorney brought charges that carried a maximum penalty of 35 years in prison. Pause there. 35 years in prison for what he did with JSTOR. He didn't hurt anyone. He didn't kill anyone. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that, did you know a first-degree murder is a 25 years in prison? He was facing 35 years in prison for what he did. Now you can see why the hacker community is a little bit more afraid than usual about prosecuting. It's because of these kind of situations. Not only was that, he also was having a charge of $1 million in fines too. Now, they were able to charge this many years, and the money amount was because the CFA is written in a way that you can basically stack upon stack of the same exact crime. But you have to understand from Aaron's situation, he was dealing with a 17-month legal battle that had no ending in sight at all. It must have been so overwhelming for him. And unfortunately, on January 11, 2013, Schwartz hung himself. And after the death, the federal prosecutors, they themselves went on to drop the charges. But I have to share one thing with you, is that the family does believe that he took his own life because of this legal situation. Aaron Schwartz's case was so overwhelming and emotional for the hacker community that not prosecutors, but legislators came together to try to form something called the Aaron's Law. This would fix basically the CFA has written. So basically that it would remove the phrase exceeds authorized access and replace it with access without authorization. And what this means is basically, which defines it as no obtain information on a computer that the accessor lacks authorization to obtain by knowingly circumventing technological or physical measures designed to prevent unauthorized individuals from obtaining that information. The unfortunate thing about this is that it didn't pass because there were some major lobbyists. Now, the thing to know about those lobbyists, they were big tech companies. I would dive a little bit more on DMCA, but one thing you need to understand is that I don't know of any cases of a hacker being prosecuted under the DMCA. It just does cause a chilling effect because of the vagueness of it. It does interfere with security research, but also it reduces the ability for you to do anything with a product that you've purchased if you do use it for something that they did not want you to use it for. So there's definitely some issues with it. So it's something you need to be aware of. But the thing is, with improvements to legislation, imagine having all the Forbes Global 2000 have a vulnerability disclosure policy. Imagine where hackers could report vulnerabilities. You know how many less breaches we would have in this country? Just think about that. Not just that, but imagine having open doors with the hackers and the security folks to be able to fight and protect one another. I think that's something that's beautiful. But the other thing is that, not just that, it would absolutely decrease the number of malicious hackers. And by malicious hackers, what do we actually call them? This was a test. Attackers. But the thing is, how we get there, I'm going to need your help. Because the reality is that we have to influence the public. Public perception of the hacker community is what keeps us in this situation. As we remembered, the imagery and the language being used to identify what is a hacker is something that needs to be changed. We need the media to work with us to know that there's two different parties here, an attacker and a hacker. And we need to know those and use the right verbiage. So for hacker, you use security researcher. For attacker, use criminal, cyber criminal, malicious actor. And it's important to note that these two groups exist, but they conflict with each other. Use the same skills, but for different intent. If you want to have a better idea of it, think of a locksmith versus a burglar. That's the difference of the two. Now, we need the press to work with us. We need them to work with us to make sure that they're reporting the correct verbiage, using the right, also not just verbiage, but images. It matters because the press has close relationships with the organizations and legislators, and that's what we need. We need organizations to start trusting us. We need to build that bilateral trust with them so then we can work together. But we also need legislation as well to try to change the circumstances that we are standing in. And so that's the thing is, by working with the press, organizations will become on board with bilateral trust and having more vulnerability disclosure policies. Also, the other thing is that to have organizations and public opinion to push and motivate Capitol Hill to update the current laws that exist. But we need all three of these groups to really have hacker rights. So you're probably wondering now, well, Chloe, how do we get there? Well, here we go. These are the 5 needs. We need to change the language and imagery and InfoSec. We need to work with the media. We need society to notice the everyday hearers. We need them to see who we are. We need them to hear our personal stories. We also need organizations to have vulnerability disclosure programs or policies in place, but we also need representatives to update today's legislation. Now, the first step that you can do at this very moment, there is a petition online, if you go to that link right there. And this petition basically is everything about how to support the ethical hackers and basically asking organizations, politicians, and the media and the hacker community to work together and for them to understand that this cannot keep going like this. Because if we want a more safe nation, we have to work with the hacker community. And the only way we're going to do that is if we start having vulnerability disclosure policies and we have an update to the current laws that exist. Another way that you can get involved is going to hackingisnotacrime.org. Hackingisnotacrime.org is basically an organization that I co-founded that is a one-stop shop for you to know the organizations and the advocates out there that are trying to change the situation that we're in. But what we're trying to do is change public perception of the hacker community by working with the press, but also to start connecting with legislators to try to push and change the current laws that exist. So you can always participate in Hacking is Not a Crime. We have just started a hacker stories. Basically, you could take a video of yourself for 2 to 8 minutes, and in the video you talk about why you went into hacking and whatnot, and what are the pros and cons about being a hacker. And then what you do is you upload that video on YouTube, and there's actual full-on directions here. So go to hackingsnotacrime.org to have a better idea of this whole project. But there's some example videos on there. Remember that whole idea that I shared with you, which is basically if we want to challenge socially constructed beliefs, they need to hear your story. Research has shown over and over that the best way how to challenge people's socially constructed beliefs is by sharing your personal story, for them to have access to who you look like and what you're saying. Having their face in front of your face actually helps a lot to see honesty. And because that's how human behavior works. We like to be connected to one another. Even though at times we don't want to remind ourselves that we're connected to certain individuals. The thing is that people's personal stories are really powerful. And we have seen that throughout history. So hacker stories is a way to basically have the public be aware of what hackers look like and to have an idea of why we went into it and what we do and the issues that we're facing. So then they could become more aware of our personal stories. Because chances are, like I said, the chances are they've never met a hacker in their entire life. So they're just going by what they're being told. So we want to challenge those socially constructed beliefs with these videos so they could see what we look like and not with a hoodie and a ski mask. Now, the second thing to do is to call it out to the press when they get it wrong. So whenever the press uses the term hacker when they should be using the term attacker, is to let them know. Send them an email, DM, respond to their article that they tweeted out saying, hey, thanks for this story. I just want to let you know that there's two parties that exist. There's attackers and hackers, and this is actually an attacker because of this. This is not a hacker. Because hackers, they stay within scope and they don't exploit without permission. And this really helps a lot. And we've definitely been doing that a lot in the advocates have for Hacking is Not a Crime. But also, if you're someone who does give comments to the press, I always let them know ahead of time that the reason I'm using the term attacker versus hacker is because they're two different parties. Because the majority of the time, they just don't know that there's two different parties. So by letting them know, then for further publications that they do, they make sure that they use the right verbiage. Because the one thing you should know about journalists, they want to make sure they're reporting as accurate as possible. And that's what we're trying to do with them, is work with them, but also understand they just don't know better. But also don't be mean to them, be kind. The third step that you can do is that if you work at a company or an organization that doesn't have a disclosure policies, this might be a good time to look into it. Disclosure policies do make companies more secure, and it also opens the door for bilateral trust. And you have these agreements between the hacker and the organization that you all agree that you're going to do the following things, stay within scope to participate, but also once it is patched, whether or not they can go publicly about the vulnerability that they found. So it's good to have that all written out ahead of time so everyone has a clear picture. But also, if you work at an organization that wants to support hackers in the community, contact me. Hacking is Not a Crime. We are building out basically a page dedicated to all the organizations that are basically wanting to work with the hacker community and believe in the hacker community. The fourth step is to know who your local representatives are. Many of us don't know who our local representatives are, and that's something that's scary. So it's good to know who they are and contact them. Set up a meeting with them. And just know, don't go out alone. Just send me a DM or a hacking is not a crime to let us know that you set up an appointment with your legislator, and we'll join you on that call. Don't go at it alone, go with a friend. But basically let them know that they need to update the current legislation. Also, what you need to know about is that there is this case called the Van Buren versus US case. That is one you need to be aware of because on November 30th, this is going to be visited in the Supreme Court. The CFA is going to look over it. The Supreme Court is going to evaluate the CFA. And the thing you need to know about this case itself is that under this expansive interpretation of the CFA for this particular case, it would become a federal crime anytime a person violates a website's terms and service. In violating the terms of service is a crime. This gives the ability to private companies to decide who goes to prison and for what, putting us all at risk for everyday online behavior. So it's really important to be aware of this because the CFA is going to be visited, and the CFA is the one law that hurts the community more than anything out there. So be aware of it. November 30th, be on top of it, be knowledgeable about it, and start making phone calls. Now, the fifth step that you can do is support organizations that are trying to support the hacker community, such as I Am the Cavalry, Disclose.io. So if you're looking into creating disclosure policies, possibly a safe harbor, Disclose.io is a great place to get started. It's also a good place to know what companies have your back and also practice disclosure policies because there's this giant GitHub list of all the organizations that have disclosure policies. Also, CertCC is a great organization, EFF and CTI League. And how I mean support, you can either volunteer your time or funds if you can. So the main takeaways out of all this is that hackers deserve protection and rights at this time because they're just trying to be the everyday hero and trying to protect you as a consumer, but also all the people that you love in their online behavior. Also, the current imagery and language has been very hard because it misleads the public into who we really are and what we actually do. We also need to work together to change the public's perception. We cannot do this alone. We have to work together. Also, signing and sharing the petition is also very helpful at this time, and also pushing for a change at this time as well. You can also share this talk if you can. But most importantly, what I want you to remember is that change starts with you and me. I know it seems like a huge, huge fight because we've been talking about it since like the 80s, but the reality is this is the time that we get it done. We have the ability to do this because more and more companies are starting to realize they need disclosure policy. And today's legislators actually know a little bit more about cybersecurity than ever before. So we have the ability to have better representation. So we do have what it takes to fight for rights. But like I said, it also needs your help too. So I want to just say thank you guys so much for existing. Thank you guys for having me on here. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and or on Twitter. I am here to answer all your questions as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chloe. We do have a few people in the chat asking some questions.
Sure.
Julian wants to know if you think it's crucial for information security professionals to know the law, more specifically, maybe even go for a JD.
So the one thing I'll tell you is that many hackers in the community don't know anything about our laws. And this is a huge problem because you tend to find this a lot with international crowds, is that they'll participate in bug bounty, but they exploit. Or they will extort people thinking that they'll be safe and protected. They are not safe or protected. So the thing is that they need to understand that you have to be concerned about these things. I think a JD would be great, but once again, JD costs a lot of money. So if you want to become an attorney and everything, sure. But the reality is that you can read up as much as you can. You can also volunteer and participate in organizations that are trying to get people in the community aware of these laws' existence. I recommend doing that more because it's actually easier to do. It's also 3 years of your life is a little bit easier, but you can actually start doing action at this time.
Awesome. We got another person wanting to know if you see lawyers and ethical hackers trying to make these amendments to the different acts and rules that we have within specifically the Biden and Harris administration, hopefully on that forefront, that cusp of legislation.
I do know that the good news about this is that when it comes to hacker rights, it's a nonpartisan issue, which is rare. So that's the good news. No matter what side you're on, people are going to listen to you. And that's something that we also saw with, CISA this week, when the director was let go of, was that he had the backings of all parties behind him. And that's something that we should acknowledge. I don't know too much about Biden's planning for cybersecurity, but what I know is that he's already started talking to some pretty well-known people in the field. And I do know that he is also working with some pretty good legal representatives too as well.
Awesome. That's all the questions we had throughout. Oh, looks like another one came through. What do you think is a good path for hackers who may have got convicted or in trouble with the law and want to stay on the ethical side of things?
Well, the good news is there are some organizations like Hacking is Not a Crime. Honestly, I'm one of those people that I think forgiveness is one of those things that we need to practice more. Just because someone did something wrong at first does not, they shouldn't be punished for it for the rest of their life. I think that if they've learned from their mistakes, that they can, work within the community. And to be honest, there are a good number of hackers in the community that once wore, I guess, the quote unquote black hat, but then switched. And I think that's okay. I think it's better for people to switch over than to always stay in the dark side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to tell you that I've started, ever since I first saw you speak, I've started telling people that I'm a hacker when I introduce, like, they're like, oh yeah, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a hacker. And they're like,
I know, it's always
I'm a real person.
It's like, wait, you're real? You're not a robot?
Yeah, they're like, wait a minute.
Where's your mask?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I just like talk about the stuff that I do, and they're like, oh my God, he's like actually there. Yeah, it's weird. Like it's all like they, it's, I think like friendly to start, and then like get to conversing, and then all of a sudden it's like, what do you do? I'm a hacker. And then it's definitely that like they back up and like, yeah, I'm a person, like I'm a normal human being, and they're like, okay, like, I guess I've been talking to you for the last 20 minutes, so.
Yeah, exactly. It's always fascinating to see what happens. But yeah, it's always one of those things but it does challenge what they thought of what a hacker looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a normal person, regular.
Yeah, pretty much. We look like anything in the world. I've had people ask like, well, why don't you have the pixie haircut, and why isn't your hair like blue or purple? And I'm like, because I like my hair.
Never dyed it, never will.
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah. Someone asked in the chat, when will the law be up for review by Congress? I wanted to ask you about that as well. With it was Van Buren versus USA. I hadn't heard about that, but how can we be supportive in that? I think that's what they were talking about, is how can we be supportive in that effort? Because like from me to the Supreme Court, I think like there's no communication. There's not even like a possibility. Like how can I possibly have an effect?
Right. So having an effect on that is a little bit tricky because Supreme Court is totally separate from, your legislators. So the thing is just to be aware of that case, read up on that case, read basically the cases that have been submitted around it. And then what you want to do is that once it has been, whatever decision has been made, that's when you start striking. And by striking, I mean, that's when you start contacting your representatives. That's when you start talking to legislators. That's when you start pushing for advocacy on it. The whole thing is that it's very hard to push it right now on Supreme Court, but just keep an eye on it at this time. But yeah, I saw another question, which is, has this been addressed at Homeland Security? Mm-hmm. Yes. The good news is that with CISA, they basically have been pushing and using the right terminology this year. So they have been trying to correct their peers that you should be using the term attacker versus hacker, which is really good. They've also been pushing out vulnerability disclosure policies across the US, saying like, you need to work with the hacker community. They are not bad people. And that's how our election was so secure, was because it worked with the hacker community. So we owe a huge debt to CISA and also to Chris Krebs on the job that he did. What about addressing this with Congress? Cora has no idea about the subject. Yeah, I would say that, to be honest, I hate to tell it, but majority of our legislators have absolutely no idea about security at all. Most of the time, they will have a conversation about 5G and machine learning, and you just stare at them blankly, saying, "I'm confused. What does that have anything to do with what we were talking about?" But okay, we can keep going on this. The thing is that you should note is that with legislators, it's really smart idea is to find out what are the things that they are passionate about, and then what you want to do is find how you can bridge that gap with hacker rights. So the best thing is, like, for example, like, I'm always concerned that, our schools are going to have some sort of breach and a bunch of data is going to be leaked out there about kids. And that's a huge fear that I have. Really? You don't say. Did you know if you did the following things, that maybe we could prevent these things from happening? And maybe we get some people in the hacker community to volunteer their time to check out your school and to see if you could do better in security for free. See,
I
that's
put a plug in there for the CFC. That's exactly what we do. So as part of our program at Maryville, we have a class that is a managed security service provider, and we do free security services for local schools, school districts, non-for-profits, just organizations that have a hard time securing, their org.
Well, see, that's the whole thing is about. Is you gotta find that similar interest.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're like, it's really cool to be part of that, because they really, like, they need this. They, and they're so appreciative. It's like, it's really cool to, just be able to help out. But yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, it definitely is. And then I saw that someone said we need shirts saying hacking is not a crime. Guess what? It's already out there. Our website, we have shirts, and we have face masks. I think we have stickers. Probably got some other goodies on there, but yeah.
Hey, Chloe, you mentioned how the hacking community kind of partnered with the government during the election to kind of be more proactive with attacking them as opposed to being reactive. Do you see that happening in non-election cycles, more of that collaboration?
I think that because the election was kind of that prime example of why you want to work with the hacker community, I think that helps a lot for the future. I think it's the thing that we need to understand is that we have to influence more our local counties and our states to be able to get federal. That's the reality of it, and it's a harder battle, but at the same time, it's actually easier, because if you are within your own community, you speak the community in a sense. So I think that's the one thing is that, but also we've had like hack the Pentagon, hack the Navy, hack the Army. So we already have these government agencies that already work with the hacker community. It's just now getting all these legislators to also believe in us.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
There was another question from Eric. Love the questions. Do you believe companies and government agencies are serious about protecting PII and PHI?
I want to say I wish. And the reason for that is that when I see companies investing heavily in sales and marketing, but you have to squeeze for money on your security, that's letting me know you're not taking this seriously. So it's really hard because you have to get like the CISOs to basically push for investment and for people to understand that like it only takes one breach that can halt your production, but also it can lose the trust of your customers so they don't return. And then you lose your business and you lose your product. So the thing is that I feel like companies don't realize they have to protect it until they've actually have gone through a breach, which is a really frustrating thing because it's like I understand there's a fire department out there, but we can still prevent forest fires from happening by being smart here. So that's the whole thing. It's like, it's not always about like, you have to do preventative work. And I know that it's like, well, I don't see any income coming from it. The thing is like, you will see income from it because that's why it's there. Like the preventative there allows you to keep doing business. So that's the whole thing, is trying to convince your peers, people that aren't in security, that security is just as important as your sales and marketing and your budgets to be something similar to that.
one of the things that's like a problem in big companies is showing ROI on cybersecurity, because it's like return on non-loss would be a better like you know, like, oh yeah, we're not going to lose $5 million, so that's our return on investment.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, is that it's very hard to try to showcase to companies that aren't security based to understand that your ROIs are going to be very different. It's not going to be money. It's going to be how many vulnerabilities you had that could have led into what kind of potential disaster. And then put down the money that if this vulnerability was used by an attacker, how much that would cost the company, and just list all of that for them to have a better idea of like how much an attack can cost a company within a year. So that's how I see it. It's like, instead, look at all your all the vulnerabilities that you've patched, and also have another row on your Excel sheet of stating like how much it would have cost a company if this vulnerability was taken advantage of, and then add it all together so then they see really the value of security.
There's another one that just popped up from Colin. Is it you can read it.
Okay. If the Earn It Act is still on track, I'm not sure of its status. Do you see it impacting security researchers in any way other than potentially being abused to break endpoint encryption? I think it's on hold right now. I'm not too on top of that one right now, but I can give you an answer if you DM me, and I will try to get that answer for you.
Cool. I really appreciate you being open. I think I'm gonna try to connect our cyber groups with you as well. We definitely want to support hacker rights. I think it's a big deal, and especially we have a class on cyber law, and so this is definitely relevant information, and every single day it's changing and updating. Here's another one. What role will AI play in the future?
I guess we'll find out. I'm looking forward to robots in the world now. Yeah, I have no idea. All I hope is that when AI is created, that security is involved. That's the only thing I'm asking for, and some diversity on the team too, so we don't have any hiccups there.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier. That group, I think that's super cool. As long as you're not a cis male is.
I'm just gonna call it out, because people are like, "What's a marginalized gender?" Oh, it's just basically you're not a cis male. Yeah. What's this male? Yeah, look it up.
Yeah. No, it's a big deal, especially so we have the only student chapter of WESIS in Missouri at our university. We're super happy to have them be their own independent org, and so anything we can do to support that, we want to.
Got it. Anything, just let me know.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate Chloe, Drew, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and have a great day. You can check on our YouTube channel. This is live stream, so you can go share the link. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're always open. Thank you so much.
Chloe.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
All right.
All right. Bye.